record this to the old, record this to the computer. It's showing live there. I like that. That's a good start. 10:01. I'm getting better, better, more improved, smoother at getting these things started right at 10 a.m. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Especially special thank you to joining us, given that it's been a little bit rocky as we get these bugs worked out of the old system. I'm going to get my notes set up over here so that I do everything according to plan. That's number one. Get this window nice and good. I'd like to have my notes right here. Yeah, then I don't have to look over to the side. And then over to the side here, I've got like a nice little view. I can see me. I can see you. I dressed up nice for you guys. Look at this. I'm matching patterns. I'm wearing bold stripes. I think these are called Bengal stripes. I've got some caffeinated coffee here. Mm. And we're about to dive into the weekend. But before we do, what about we have a little chat about resistance? Make sure I've got my water bottle somewhere. Okay, good stuff. I filled it up. I didn't bring it with me. Sometimes that's how it goes. Okay, well, happy Friday, everyone. Thanks for being here. If you're here, put a little, I don't know, write something in the chat so I can say hello to you. And I think I have to get there. I think I have to, what do I have to do? I have to click through. Oh, there's Dave. Hello, Dave. Yeah, Monster Cup. Look at this. Oh my goodness. It's an owl. I think this is Hedwig from Harry Potter. My house is filled up with coffee cups that are not of my choosing. And what I mean by that is that my lovely wife buys a lot of mugs that are based on Disney stuff because she loves Disney. And I drink from them because I could care less. I'm not really that interested in, I don't know, trying to wrest control or establish the coffee cups as being, that's not the battle I'm going to fight. Good morning, Candida. Good morning, Dave. Good to have you with us. Uh, the reason I say that this pattern matching works, for those of you that are interested in stuff like this, like I am, when you want to match patterns, you want to make sure that the scales are different. So big, bold stripes, and then a different scale, more smaller stripes. And ideally, you want to match different types of patterns. So here we've got stripes, and then here we've got checks across patterns. So I say that it looks good. That's what I'm declaring. And if you have a differing opinion, create a different live stream that I'm not on and then talk about my outfits there. Don't talk about them here. All right, cool. So we're going to talk about resistance today. That's what our theme has been this week. And this is like a super important part of transformational work, of leadership, of coaching, anything where you're playing transformation. And I'm going to talk, before we get into that, I'll talk about when there's no resistance, and why that is and what's going on there. So I'll talk about that first. Then we'll talk about sort of some of the ways to work through resistance. Let me just get my notes back. There we go. And then we've got some questions from someone, a friend of mine, who asks some questions about, like, what about when you have someone who doesn't know what they want? And we'll talk about how that ties in with resistance. Before we go there, let's see what's been going on for me this week. This week we've got a puppy who's freshly neutered, so life has been crazy, and that little guy's running around with a cone. I've blocked my door, so I think we're going to be free from distraction of Pongo, the newest addition to this household, being crazy and getting into trouble. He's been pretty good. For me, I think I've shared, maybe you've watched some of my writing, maybe you've read some of my writing or followed some of it. You know, it's an interesting time, in particular because, hey, Harmony, nice to have you with us. Crush those weights, lift those plates. It's a time right now where I notice that, economically speaking, I think all of us are feeling pretty stagnant. You know, there's a big sweep in the election, and I try to stay clear of like the politics of it because I'm not really interested in that, but I am interested in the sociology of it. Why did people vote the way they did? What led people down that path? And as always, I'm not so much interested in the easy answers, which would be like, there's a bunch of racists, or there's a bunch of people that are woke and they can't see anything past that. Yeah, maybe, but that's not really giving much credit to other people. And when you don't give much credit to other people, you tend to also be fairly dismissive of yourself in other ways. That shows up over there, what shows up over there, what you notice over there, what you project onto other people. The same thing happens for ourselves. So I'm more interested in like what's going on. And one of the big things I hear time and again is that people are struggling with the economy. We're feeling the crunch of high prices, of the fact that billionaires own like everything, so on and so forth. It's very easy to get down on that. What I notice is that that means there's just been less deals being made. You know, there's less people reaching out for coaching. There's less of that conversation. And we're in a time when the old ways I used to know of connecting with people, like writing on Facebook or LinkedIn, we're up against the algorithms. So I'm not really saying anything too new, but what that does for me, my process through that is often at first like, something's going wrong, something's wrong, fear, how do I work with that? What do I do? I want to react to my fear, blah 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 blah. And then let's adjust this mic just a touch. There we go. Nice mic, right? Better than the headset I was using. And then what happens from there is I go back to basics. And so when I'm in the game of creating clients, ultimately what that's about in this line of work is building relationship. If you want someone to be a yes to transformational work, which is deeply vulnerable and intimate, you have to be able to build relationships that are based on intimacy. And so I've been kind of like a farmer when their crops fail. You know, we could think of this like maybe a year where a lot of our crops haven't come through. What do we do? And the reactive self is sort of like, I got to pour more water on these crops or something like that. But the real work is just go and get into a lot of connection. And so there's a few ways that I've been doing that. One of them is that I've been saying yes to things that just have me in connection with people. Don't necessarily build a client relationship, but that's okay because before we even go down that path, we have to look like where are people? Where can I connect with more people? And so there's a couple of things that I've been saying yes to. I'm saying yes to an opportunity to go down and support a bunch of investors that a former client of mine is bringing down to Mexico, and they're going to build a house for someone. And I'm going to go and help them create a context for that experience, a really powerful way to relate to it, and then support them through each of the nights, you know, in between doing this hard work. And I too will be lifting a hammer and building a house, which is kind of cool because that's not something I'm not a do stuff with hands kind of guy. I'm a do stuff with brain kind of guy. My path through life has been software and law, you know, intellectual stuff. And so it'll be nice. It'll be kind of an opportunity to be outside of my comfort zone. And when I talk about setting up a powerful context, there's a couple of ways this sort of stuff can go. One is that people can come down, they can build a house for other people, and they can feel good about the selflessness with which they helped someone else. And that's a beautiful thing. We don't want to take away from that. But that might very much be inside their wheelhouse. And an opportunity like this, when you take people out of their comfort zone, bring them somewhere and support them to do or be with stuff that may be out of their comfort zone, the opportunity is to have them really present to that, to have them distinguish what's happening for them, to get really present to like how they are feeling as they're going through the process. And I'm going to call it the bypass that's available there is to put your attention on how you're doing good and how you're making someone else feel better or helping them or whatever. The attention goes over there. And part of what I want to do with these people is support them to take a look at this, like, yes, hold that. That's really important. But also, what can I see for myself? Maybe there's times when I'm getting frustrated by this process, or maybe there's times when I'm feeling kind of like disenchanted with my own life, or, you know, whatever it happens to be, whatever gets driven up, we want to create what I would call a clearing in which people can talk about that and have that out in the open, because that's where the work internally can really happen. That's how this gets to be something beyond an experience where people just went and did something for other people. So that's what I'll be doing there. And I'm doing that. There's no payment that comes to me through it, but it's an opportunity to be of service, to put myself with other people, and to explore my own, discomfort that comes from maybe lifting a hammer and feeling stupid, or having to do hard work, or whatever it happens to be. So that's one of the things I'm up to. Another thing that I've taken on recently is I'm chairing a large number, maybe about 10 to 13 different groups for someone that reached out that are If you're in America, you know of these. There's groups called like EO. That might be more Canadian. YPO is another one. There's also Vistage. And the idea of these groups is these forums where people can come, entrepreneurs typically, can come and get supported by other entrepreneurs. So it's sort of like the wisdom of the jury a little bit. Like we just have people that are in a particular domain together, can share vulnerably with each other, and can get supported, get advice from each other. And the thing about this particular work is there's not a lot that I'm doing. I'm mostly holding the space, chairing, drawing them in to have their conversation and bring their wisdom to the table rather than coaching anything. And so this is another place. The group or the groups I'm working with are for venture capitalists, VCs that are at various places, various levels along the venture capitalism journey, and that are coming together and wanting support. Excuse me. And so down that path, again, it's an opportunity just to connect with people, to bring my being to that space, and to slowly build relationship. And it's really been fascinating. I've done about 3 of these. I do about 10, 13, something like that each month. So it's a lot of my time, quite a lot of my time. And a couple things are happening. The first is I notice all of my old fear-based patterning about not being good enough, being a disappointment, being a letdown, not providing enough value, and looking stupid. These are very, 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 very smart people that are really good at identifying the patterns and the order amidst the chaos of the world and determining like what's the path that's most likely to come through out of this chaos. So it's been a real opportunity for me to recognize, to notice my fear, my desire to like step in, to do something significant, to like have an impact. And the work is almost always, in this ontological realm, is for me to recognize or to come back to reminding myself I have an impact. Who I am by virtue of who I be in the space is impactful, and I don't have to do something on top of that. I don't have to add another layer. Let's just turn this heater on. There we go. Maybe you've had this experience being around someone where they're already impactful, and then they're being impactful on top of that. They're kind of going out of their way to let you know that they have an impact, or to like be helpful above being helpful. This is often what our survival mechanism, our fear can do, is we layer who we are already as like generous, but we have a story that we learned from a young age from our fear that we're selfish, maybe the opposite of our generosity. And so then we learn to layer generosity on top of that. So you can see this if you've ever been around someone who's like a nice person, but then they're being nice on top of being nice. It's like a hat on a hat. And the reason I'm sharing this is just to distinguish, I can see that reactive self coming online for me. And my practice is to set it aside, or rather, more accurately, to recognize it's there, but not do anything with it. Just to distinguish, oh, that part of me is online, it's there, it's scared. There's a little bit of confrontation in my space. That's okay. I'm going to let you be there, but you're not going to dictate what I do. And this is how we move through life without letting our fear dictate what we do. The second thing I've really been learning from that is hearing them speak, and a lot of the same conversation is alive for them. It's really tough to push deals through right now. The economy is very slow. People are not really looking to like lean out, to make big shifts, to make big changes. People are more pulling inwards. And so one, that's kind of affirming. It's sort of like, oh, it's not just me that's feeling this way. Maybe not just you that's feeling this way. This is felt pretty globally. That's the first thing I'm present to. And the second thing I'm present to is Warren Buffett's sage advice on investing, which is when everyone is scared, be greedy. When everyone is greedy, be scared. So when the housing bubble, for example, in 2008 was alive, everyone was very greedy. I got to get a piece of some of this action. Get scared. That's the time for us to pull inwards. When everyone's scared and sort of pulling inwards, that's the time to start to look, to get out there. And so whilst I'm present to the collective feeling we're all having, the other thing that's really alive for me is that there are going to be some people that are willing to take some bets during this time. And those people are going to be the ones ahead of the pack when things shift, as they always do. And our economy is always cyclic. We always move through that sort of stuff. That S is a bit sibilant there. Cyclical. That's something maybe I'll work on. We got 6 people viewing. So I've heard from Dave, Candida, Harmony. If you're someone other than those people, just say hi in the chat. Put something in there so we know that you're there. It's more fun when we know who's here and that's hanging out with us. I promise we won't call on you. You won't have to stay. You can put your name and you can leave. You can do whatever you like. But it's just nice to see a name to the face and give you a what up. How's it going? So that's sort of the stuff that's there, and part of the context I'm really living into during this period, this season, is one of being a farmer. You know, what's the farmer do? He looks at his soil, he makes sure that there's nothing wrong there, and then he begins to plant seeds again. And so I'm planting those seeds and I'm practicing a lot of patience. Want to know a secret? That coffee's got a little bit of Bailey's in it, and it's delicious. And it's going to make my throat all phlegmy, and it's going to make it harder for me to hey Diana, it's going to make it harder for me to talk with the richness in my voice that I want. I have a friend who's thinking of getting into vocal work. She's already a very accomplished singer and has done a lot of like VO sort of stuff, but she's talking about really doubling down on that. We were talking today, and she was sharing like, oh, I'm worried that if I go and look into what's going on for me, I'm going to be told to stop eating dairy. But of course, if you want to do a lot of VO work, you got to get away from the dairy. It tends to swell our vocal cord and stuff like that. So me, I'm just going to do this video and I'm going to drink some creamy alcoholic beverage in my coffee and we're going to see how it goes. It might be awesome. It might suck. Okay. So let's start with resistance. And I want to begin by talking about um, 2 things by way of entering into this topic of conversation. The first is the thing I led with, which is if we're doing anything transformational, if we're leading people to a result that is outside of the box, that's outside of what we're already reliable to do, and that includes in a team, in an organization, in a group of people that you're leading, in an entire sector of your organization or your market space, or if you're coaching someone and you have a client that's leaning outside of their box, that's leading outside of their what they're reliable to do, resistance will show up. So we'll elaborate a bit on that. But first, before we go there, I want to talk about when resistance isn't there. And so this often happens in coaching. It often happens in leadership conversations where people show up and they're like, I don't know what to work on, or I don't really know what I want, or I'm not really sure what to get supported with. And usually the reason that that's happening, before we go to the reason that's happening, let's talk about how it goes. So in those situations, usually there's sort of some celebration, like way to go. You don't seem to have anything struggling. You're crushing it. You're going just perfect. But what's really usually happening below the surface is that people aren't aiming for something that is outside of what they're already reliable to do. If we're aiming for a goal inside of our wheelhouse, inside of our existing range. So imagine we have this entire circle, a nice big giant pizza pie, and this slice is the stuff that you're already reliable to do. And these 2 lines extend outward infinitely. So there's always more you can do inside your range, but it's still inside your range. I'm really good at going to parties and running the room and being the life of the party. What if I went to a bigger party? What if I went to a gala and I ran the gala? That might require a bit of change or shift or something different, but I'm pretty reliable to do it. I just need to do what I'm already doing better, harder, faster, stronger. So that's not going to drive up much resistance. There's nothing there for me to resist. It's in my wheelhouse. And so when people don't have resistance going on, it's okay. It's not wrong. It's not that we should be going and seeking out resistance like just as an end unto itself. It just tells us that we're probably up to stuff for which there's no big challenge involved in making it happen. And that's totally fine. It's just not going to be transformational. And if people are wanting transformation in their lives, the first thing that usually happens then from that place is that they ask themselves, well, okay, let's find something I'm resistant to and I'll run headfirst into that. I will go towards the resistance. So this would be like if we had a hockey team and they were really good at not losing. That was their expertise. They've learned a really good defensive game. That's great, and it'll allow them to beat other teams that are also playing to not lose, but aren't as good as that as this other team. But to really win the Stanley Cup or whatever it is, you have to play to win. And the consequence of playing to win is we kind of have to let go of the stuff we've been doing to make sure we never lose. You have to make some plays. At a risk of mixing my metaphors, if you're playing poker and you're really good at like holding onto your chips and only making safe bets so that you protect your chips and always keep the same pile, you're like reliable not to lose too much, but also not to gain too much. That's fine, but you're not going to be a big winner. At some point, you have to push all those chips into the center of the table and put yourself at risk. And that will bring you into confrontation with the thing you're in resistance to. So when we're trying to figure out what is it? What is it I'm going to go for? What am I going to try to crush? What am I going to try to make happen? What is worth it for me that I'd be willing to overcome this resistance? That's where we want to aim. We don't want to just look at like, okay, we've been playing to avoid losing. We're resistant to losing. So what there is for us to do is to lean headfirst into losing. Let's play this game so that we definitely lose. That's great. You're going to get better at intentionally losing, but you're not really going towards, you don't have a goal beyond that. So you might overcome your fear about losing, but you still haven't really put yourself going towards that thing that's really edgy to go after, for which your resistance shows up and gets in the way. So when we don't have resistance, that's usually what's happening is we're playing a game that on some level is kind of safe, doesn't require us to be confronted by the stuff we're afraid of that we don't want to face, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So why do we have resistance? Why is that even here? Like one of the fantasies I hear often when I talk to people about this stuff is a desire like, well, resistance is, it tells me something, good start. What it tells me is that what I'm after, I just don't really want. Because if I did want it, I wouldn't resist it. I would go towards it. And that is ultimately kind of like having a life where you never resist anything you're up to. And that's totally okay, but that ends up again being a life that is it's a small game. It's a game where you end up playing only in the realms where you're already accomplished and adept. And this usually starts to be the thing we start to aim towards in our late 20s, early to mid 30s. We start thinking, I don't like this feeling of resistance. I don't like who I become. I don't like how it goes. I'm just going to do the stuff that I'm already reliable to. And then it kind of falls away. And the truth is resistance is just a natural state that shows up when we're up against something new and unknown. So let's draw out how we get here and kind of the flavor of our resistance. And then we'll start talking about like what's its function, what's the process of overcoming resistance, that sort of stuff. And as we go through these things, you can really help me, whether especially if you're watching live, but also if you're watching after the fact. You can help me by sharing your objections to anything I'm sharing, your questions. Questions and objections are really, really good because they allow us to deepen this conversation together. And our objections are so valuable because that's usually where the gold is. When I have an objection to someone offering me something, that tells me, oh, here's a place where I don't want to let that in. I've got maybe some good reasons, some good stories, and that's fine at face value. But if we can start to look below that, we can start to see like what might be some of the stories I have about this. And then we can start to unpack that. We can do some really good work. So please help me out that way. Share anything that's coming up for you as we're talking about this stuff. Okay. So let me just open a window here. It's a little warm in this office. Bear with me. This guy. Oh, yeah. Okay. Now we're cooking. And soon we'll be chilling. So the way we begin, and 1 second, excuse me. The way we begin, and you may have heard me lay this out from time to time, is we start as this creature of pure light. We come out of the womb without a story about what's acceptable or unacceptable, what we should do, what we should not do. And quickly we receive training from the world around us, innocent training, or rather we interact with the world around us and we take it on as training. And the sort of training is like, I show up a certain way and I get this feedback from people. And the feedback's not sort of like in a 360 review. It's just a look on their face. It's just them holding their breath a bit or like raising their eyebrows as I start to say something as a child. I may be like, what's on that man's face? And everyone goes, and they freeze and they're like, oh my God, this is awkward for that guy. And now it's awkward for me. And I, as the child, recognize that. I feel that on some level. I feel there's like a stop, there's a freeze in the energy, and I conclude, maybe this natural curiosity I have is not okay. And so I start to learn in these situations, don't be that way. Don't be what was intuitive and natural. Instead, turn it down. Take your curiosity and set it aside. Or I show up a particular way and instead I get like an experience of disappointment or letdown or frustration. And in those situations, I might learn, oh, it seems like I needed to bring something more there. And I'm not really sure what it is. I guess I'll just double down on what I already know to do. So I just take the light that I already am, the qualities of being I bring into the table, and I crank them up a little bit because I have no other tools. We're kind of unsophisticated. We're very innocent at this point. So I take those tools, I turn up the volume. There we go. So this is the beginning of our resistance. And it's not a resistance to a situation. It's a resistance to that particular experience that got created in the moment. And the way it gets internalized is as a resistance to what is natural and innate for myself. I learn around anyone, any situation, any circumstance that has the same energetic resonance as those people, maybe my parents, my uncle, my fellow peers at school, whatever. I learn it's not okay to just be who I am. Who I am in this situation is not enough, or it's too much. And so I learned to turn that up or turn it down. So this is how our resistance gets initially created. Hello, is it Mamal? Mamal, I think. Oh, you wrote something awesome and I'm excited to read it. Let me just finish this part and then I'm going to come to what you've written there. And please let me know if I'm saying your name correctly. I think it's Mamal, which means the emphasis is on the second syllable of your name. So we put this together. We have zero consciousness of it. This is sort of automatic socialization. This is just what we learn as we go forward. And as I do this, it becomes natural. It becomes automatic. And I go into life and I find myself around other situations, people, circumstances, places with that same energetic resonance. And I continue to do the thing. And what I notice is I don't have to be with that awkward feeling that existed when I just showed up previously the way I did. And so I get more feedback that the way I'm being is better. It means that the tribe accepts me a little bit. They stay a little bit more open because I'm not confronting them with whatever they have struggled being with. Just to go back to that example where I'm like, what's on that guy's face? We have a story that guy now feels awkward and it's wrong for someone to feel awkward, but it's not. There's nothing wrong with feeling awkward. That's a part of being alive. Just like there's nothing wrong with feeling embarrassed. There's nothing wrong with feeling ashamed. There's nothing wrong with feeling suffering. These are inevitable parts of our condition as humans. So we get better and better and better and better at this until we get to this point in our lives where we look like this, or maybe you look a bit younger, or maybe you look a little bit older, or whatever it happens to be. And we stop seeing any of this as something internal, and it just lands for us like it's a way we are, and it's the way to be in life. And that's where we begin our journey today. Okay, let me read what you wrote here, Mamal. Mamal wrote, hello, I've heard cases where one is played to win but had lost. Right, so someone goes out and they're like, I'm going to play for the keeps. I'm going to lay it all on the line, and they lose. And as a result, they experience heart failure and burnout as a result. One part of the self wants to protect them, we want to protect ourselves to avoid that burnout, but another part still wants to fight to win. How would you help someone navigate this? That is a fantastic question, and I'm going to come back to that. I want to lay out some track for us, and then we'll speak to that question inside the context of what we've laid out. Really, really great question. Thanks, Memal, and thanks for being here. Okay, so we've built up this structure. So the first part of the function of resistance is to ensure that we're liked. It's to ensure that we become someone that people welcome. If every time you bring me to a party, and we live in a society where we have a story that it's wrong to feel awkward, and I just keep showing up and being like, what's on your face? Why does your throat look weird? Why do you wear that dress with that tie? If I start asking those questions, people are going to find me awkward, and then over time they're just going to pull away because they themselves don't want to be with that awkwardness. And as a result, I get removed from the tribe, along the lines of like the village where we grew up ecologically or evolutionarily, we were in tribes of 150 people, no more. And over time, I became ostracized, and that is death. When humans were first kind of establishing our psyche and stuff like this, our ego, all of that, fitting in with the tribe was essential, absolutely essential to our survival. So on some level, this resistance is very like primary. It's very primal and fundamental. And our resistance is designed to help us avoid those situations and any situation that might lead down that path. So what it's trying to do when I feel resistance is it's trying to avoid me getting into those situations, because in those situations, I had no idea how to work with it. I didn't know how to remedy things. I just knew things were wrong and I needed to make sure it didn't happen again. So you can imagine there's like this timeline where I say the thing that I say, and then people have the reaction they have, and then I go, I freeze, and then I learn this is bad. I don't want to be here. And we kind of awkwardly move through this and pretend it's not there and just sort of put the carpet over top of it. And then I learn and get better and better as I go through my life at avoiding getting here. And the thing is, because of that, I never learn how to navigate everything that happens after this moment. And that makes that everything after that moment scary. I don't know how to, I never learn how to get past it. All that I learn is avoid that. Just don't get in there. And so it exists in our cognition as like a black void, a space that we don't know how to deal with. And more so, what we learn is just don't deal with it. Avoid that altogether. Do not get there. And that becomes very scary, because as time goes on, we get better and better at avoiding it, which increases the story that that's what we have to do. The more you avoid something in your life, the more you will create a story that that thing is to be avoided. The more I avoid something in my life, the less able I am to be with it. And the less able I am to be with it, the more I'm going to construct my life, the more I'm going to manage my life and how I show up in it so as to avoid that thing, which then reinforces that that thing must be avoided. And I'm going to do that for myself, and I'm going to do that for other people. Because remember, when we feel empathy for someone feeling a particular thing, on some level, it's the same as us feeling it. We can create a bit of distance, but way less than we think we can. And so what really ends up happening is now it's no longer just, I don't like feeling awkward over here. I can't handle feeling awkward over there. And so then I become a parent. And when my child starts to say stuff that makes that person over there feel awkward, I feel awkward for and with them. And then I need to shut that down because I have no capacity to be with awkwardness myself. I know how bad this feels, and now I'm experiencing them feel that. I know how bad they feel. We must avoid this. And so I train my child, and then the cycle repeats. So it's a very sophisticated system, and that system really supports us on some level. It gets us here. It allows us to avoid being ostracized, blah, 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 blah. So that's kind of the function of our resistance, is to avoid ending up in a situation for which we have no history of being able to navigate. Our resistance is designed to keep us out of the places that we are afraid we might not be able to fix. And well, let's have a sip of coffee here together. Simultaneous sip. And so this becomes a lot of what our life becomes about. Subtly and unconsciously, we become better and better and better at avoiding this sort of stuff. I'll give you a very intimate example. Growing up, one of the things I learned to really be afraid of was the experience of disappointment. As you can probably tell, part of who I am as a man is a man who has a lot of presence. I have a big impact. Come into the room and people are like, whoa, who's that guy? And that carries with it like a weightiness, oh, look, that guy, there's that guy. He's going to do something cool. And then the thing is, I'm a human. And sometimes I do something cool, but other times I do something not so cool. Sometimes I'm a total dud. And as a result, what happens is the the distance between the promise of what I sort of like brought with me into the room and the disappointment, the letdown people felt is a big gap. And so one of the things I learned to do to manage this is diminish my impact, diminish the presence I have, because then what I do is I lower the gap. If I set you up when I come into a room with zero expectations, there's not really far for me to fall in terms of disappointing you. It's a very smart system, right? Here's the intimate part. This showed up without a doubt in the realm of sex. And so in my sexuality, sex was became this very anxiety provoking thing for me. Very, very frightening because I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to be a disappointment. I want to be a good lover. I want to be, effective. I want my partners to like feel great when they're with me. Ah, and they're excited about that because I'm attentive and stuff like that. And the start of the relationship's good. And all that did was it created more heightening for me. And so what would happen sexually is that we would start to get frisky. And then this fear would come into my head. This fear about what was going to happen that I couldn't navigate. It's going to be a disappointment. And I don't know how to navigate being with someone that's disappointed in how things are going. And so what I would do is I'd fixate on that and I'd get stuck. And consequently, sex would go one of two ways. I'd avoid it or we'd get mired in that disappointment. And the healing for this, the way out of it, is to be with someone as I'm disappointed and to be with someone as they're disappointed and just to stay the course, to stay intimate in the midst of that. That's crazy making, right? And so my whole system became very resistant to sex because of that black void and because of all of that inability to navigate that and all of the meaning I was going to create and how I'd get into my head about it and be like, oh, fuck. They're thinking this is a letdown. They're thinking like, man, this was going to be great and it's not. They're not having fun. They're not excited. Blah, 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 blah. I'm not excited. And then, I'm not going to go into TMI, but you can connect these dots yourself and imagine some of how things would go from there. Hmm. How's that? What a start we're off to. We're really tearing the band-aid off here. So that's an example of how this can show up in one place in our life. But I want to be really clear, our resistance is undiscerning. So that showed up in the romantic realm, but the exact same way of being, the exact same safeguards, the exact same concern about this black void that I didn't know how to navigate showed up in business. So when I'd show up to lead, I'd be worried I'm going to show up and I'm going to be a disappointment at this presentation. And then so I would have another bunch of strategies to avoid having to be with people in their disappointment of how my presentation would go. And consequently, I'd show up and I would over prepare and I would spend hours upon hours upon hours trying to make this perfect so that we never hit this point. And so where that would leave me is that I was reliable to do anything for which I could make it happen by over preparing or by avoiding making excuses and not going into this black void. So I could I could do fine when the job in like a particular presentation was to deliver the facts and to over prepare and to make sure that it's all going the way it's going. That would be fine. And I could do good in jobs that like I would be good enough doing my other stuff that I would sort of get a pass on being able to avoid having to do a presentation off the cuff. But as soon as there was an opportunity where I had to like go off the cuff, I would find a million different reasons why I avoid it. And part of the reason that these conversations, these talks are so valuable for me, let alone you, is because it's an opportunity for me to face that. To show up. I don't have much of a script. I've got 6 bullet points and a desperate desire for you to put more questions in the chat. And that's what I got. That's what I'm working with. And so this is how we start to confront this stuff. We start to face it and put ourselves in that experience. And there's been lots of times where, I'll go live and there's one viewer and then that viewer drops off. And then here I am with no one watching or with one person watching, feeling all of that resistance to the moment. This is disappointing. I'm disappointed. I thought I could do better. I thought we would draw more, all of that sort of stuff. And that's where we have to practice from. I'm going to turn a fan on because talking about this stuff's getting me a little steamy. There we go. We've got some tools to be with this stuff. Let me know if that fan is too loud and distracting, and I will turn it off. It does sound like it's coming quite loud through the headphones, so just let me know about that. So this is hopefully what we've drawn out here at this point helps you kind of see resistance through a lens where it's like, oh, maybe it's not so much of a villain. Maybe it's not so much of a bad thing. Maybe it's not even wrong that it shows up. Maybe it's just a natural part of our evolution that's there to support us. And Diana writes a question here. What could be a driver to overcome resistance? That is a great question too. Thank you for putting there. I'm going to come to that. We'll speak to that also when we talk to Mamal's question. The next bullet point I've got here is what is the process for overcoming resistance? So before we can overcome this, we have to understand what we've laid out. What a lot of times what we do is we don't break any of this down. We don't see how our resistance is actually like a beautiful system designed to ensure our acceptance, to ensure that we're okay, to ensure that we're safe. We don't see that when we're feeling resistant, what's really going on is that there's a part of us that's really confronted and scared. And because we don't see any of that, we come to it from a very superficial level and a very, I like to use the term irreverent. Like we're very dismissive of it. We're quick to slap a label on it and then try to fix whatever that label tells us. So I might say like, oh, I'm just someone that doesn't like sex, or I'm just someone that is lazy, or I'm just someone that's a procrastinator. And then, okay, what are some tools to help me avoid procrastination? Thinking like the problem is just that I've got this gene in my head called procrastination gene, and it just makes me procrastinate on stuff. I don't get any of this other underlying depth that's there. And consequently, it doesn't really matter if you get 1,000,001 different structures that help you overcome procrastination. It's not going to really make the difference because you're not really addressing the thing below the surface. I had someone reach out to be a guest on this podcast once, and one of the things they led with was like, oh, I hired someone on Fiverr or one of these sites to come and slap me in the head every time I opened up my social media while I was trying to do work. And he was like, it totally changed the way I worked. I don't open up social media anymore. Sure, but I'd be willing to bet that this person did not actually get at the underlying resistance. He just created some sort of thing like he's reliable to do work as long as someone's going to threaten to slap him in the head. Or more likely what's going to happen, he's going to start to develop a nice callus on the side of his head, and then he's going to be able to withstand the slaps, and then he can take 2 slaps before he goes back to it, and then 3, and then so on and so forth. And maybe you've had this experience in your life where you've tried to put something into place to overcome whatever flavor of resistance you have, but you notice that it's got a diminishing returns. It works great at first and you're excited and you're like, I'm turning my life around. And then slowly but surely your life reasserts itself. And that's because we're not actually getting at what's underneath it. Okay, let's have a sip and read what you've written here. Diana says, how do we how do we use resistance so to learn from it, use it as a learning curve? Excellent. We're going to come to that. And Candida, you write, not really a question, but I would love to hear you talk about this. Shirzad, I think Kameen, maybe Shamin, uses the analogy of the work on overcoming resistance is like being your personal black belt training. When you face it, you will grow. Yes. Okay, so I think now we can start to come back to what Mamal has written here. So I'll just reread her question. I've heard cases where one has played to win but had lost. So this is a situation where we're like, okay, I've been doing all of this thing. I've been avoiding losing. I don't know how to be with myself. That's a scary thing. I've built this whole game plan on avoiding to lose. Now I'm going to play to win. But in doing so, they experienced hard failure and burnout as a result of it. And one part of the self wants to protect against that burnout, but another part still wants to fight to win. How do we navigate this? So this system we've drawn out, this is inside each of us as humans. This is the human condition, we could call it. And this system of resistance has been something we've unconsciously been building for multiple decades. If you're in your 20s, yay you. At your 20s, what we're usually doing is we're getting better and better at avoiding the thing we don't want without having to really be present to the consequences because we're still quite young. Life feels wide open. And like sort of dropping a river or a rock in a pond, the ripples take time to go all the way out and then to come back. So at first, we're like, this is amazing. I'm changing my life. I no longer have to be with this awkward, horrible feeling I used to hate and dread. I don't have it anymore. And then as we start to get into our 30s and our 40s, we start to be present, not so much to the benefit of those strategies that we've been building, but also to the consequence of them. Like we start to say things like, I noticed I don't have a lot of close friends. Or I noticed I'm really good at work, but I tend to hate my coworkers. Or I tend to be frustrated at all the morons that I have to work with, or. So the ripples are starting to come back to us. So we've got this system in place that's been there for 20, 30, 40 years, built up with a lot of resistance about avoiding this thing. And maybe what we learn, maybe we come and watch a call like this, or we have a conversation like this, like Mamal said, and we're like, I'm going to play to win. And so we do that. We're like, I'm going to lean out over the edge, and we dive into this black void. And what happens is we get into that black void, and we run right in head first to the very experience we learned to dread all those years ago. And what happens is we do everything in our power. We've basically stepped over the wall and plunged ourselves into it. But now we do everything in our power to not have to stay here. We put ourselves here, but now we try to get out of it. So to use your example, Mamal, we might work super hard. We're like, I'm going to lean out over the edge of my disappointment, of my resistance. I'm going to plunge into disappointment. I'm going to do it. I'm doing it. I'm going to advertise it. I'm going to tell all my friends about this is what I'm doing. Hold me accountable. And they do it. And we find ourselves there. And now what's happening is we're trying to scramble to get away from it. We don't have the capacity really to distinguish any of this. It's brand new. And instead, what happens is we're like, fuck, this feels terrible. I'm going to get out of here. And so burning ourselves out is a really good way to do that. It's sort of like if you were scared of getting on ice, but you overcome your resistance, you get yourself on ice, and then your fear grabs you, and all you can do is run as fast as you can to get off that ice. And it looks really funny on animated cartoons when cartoon characters do this. You just do this on the ice. You've got the ice and you just run as fast as you can. And you might make a little bit of motion, but it's not the most effective way to do anything. And so that's what leads to our burnout. We are basically plunging ourselves into something brand new without a lot of support for this new thing we're leaning into. And because we've spent 20, 30, 40, 50, however many years avoiding it, we're like Bambi. We have no capacity to really calibrate or whatever. And so we get on that ice, we sprint, we escape eventually, but it took so much energy. We're exhausted. And so then where we get left is, well, man, this sucks. I don't want to do that again. And now we're caught in this situation where we're trying to choose between the lesser of two evils. Either I can stay here with the devil I know. Yeah, I don't get to, I have to over prepare a lot and I often feel tired. Or I can continue to lean into this, but the consequence is I burn out. Neither of those is a very potent way of living our life. It's not a very empowered experience. So that's what creates the situation Mamal is describing for us. That's why that happens. The real practice is to notice that as soon as we step over the resistance into that thing we really want, playing to win, becoming the leader that doesn't have to prepare, becoming the sort of leader that can run an incredible organization while working half as many hours as you have been. And let's assume in this example, as a leader, because you really care, you've been working 80 hours. So you're not trying to go down to like 5 hours a week. You're trying to just work a normal schedule, but you can't figure out how to do that. And when you lean into it, it blows out your anxiety or whatever it happens to be. So the real work, and we'll get into this in a bit, and I think it's going to come to your questions, Diana and Candida. The real work for us is to learn how to be with the feeling that our burnout is seeking to avoid. Putting this a bit of a different way, what happens is initially the way our resistance looks is avoidance. We avoid this black void of fear and this feeling that we don't yet know how to navigate, this experience that we don't want. So we avoid it. And then we step over the wall and we kind of believe to ourselves, hell yeah, you stepped over that wall. Way to go. You're crushing it. Now you've overcome your resistance and things will be good. But instead, our resistance just shows up in a new way. And so it can be valuable to know that once we step over that wall into the black void, our resistance is actually going to ramp up at first. Rather than becoming less resistant and more relaxed, this journey begins with becoming more resistant in the moment. And that increase in resistance feels noxious. to us, whatever your variety or version of noxiousness is. So for me, it feels like even more anxiety about how I'm a disappointment. It feels like even more dread or distaste or whatever. For you, it might feel even more like a need to go and just take care of well-being, or a need to sit on the couch, or a need to avoid this thing, or a need to just unplug from this and sit and receive a message from spirit, or whatever. Your resistance is going to use whatever it has to use to try to get you out of this experience. So we're going to come to how we overcome that. That's the next thing. I just want to check and make sure that I'm not missing anything we should talk about at this point. How do we overcome it? Excellent. And how do we use resistance to learn from it? Excellent. Yeah. And so Candida, brought this point from Shirzad Shamin. I'm not sure how I say that last name, but the analogy on work of overcoming your resistance is like being a personal black belt training. When you face it, you will grow. So we want to recognize something. The first thing we want to recognize is no matter what, my resistance is going to be online. Overcoming our resistance, transformation is not a one and done. It's not a check off the box. It's not an event. It's a process. So I step over that wall and now I'm facing my resistance more closely. And I want to recognize my resistance is going to kick up in that moment. It's going to kick up even higher. And it's going to try to convince me that it's not resistance. Because if it does that, then it's easier for me to choose the path that leads me out. No, I'm not being resistant. I'm choosing the smarter path. And then I get to continue avoiding this thing that's scary. And so the real work is to sit with this and to initially slow down and to breathe and to regulate ourselves so we can come down from our reactivity. So let's talk a bit about that. And that's going to require me to think about how this actually works. Yes, so this is how we actually overcome the resistance in this moment. So the path through this, once we've stepped over that wall into this black void that's frightening, step one, to go back, is first we got to get clear on something we want to make happen, some experience, some way we want to be, some result we want to create, for which leaning into that resistance will be a necessary step. Getting over the resistance and confronting the thing we've devoted our lives to avoiding will be necessary to create that result. That's our North Star. That's the compass that drives us towards, that makes it worth going through all of this. If we just have the story, I want to be someone who overcomes their resistance, it won't be enough. Because then what that does is it just has you focus on the resistance in the moment. And then that isn't enough to keep you going through to get to the other side. It's sort of like, I want to be someone who's just willing to go into tunnels and I don't care about the light at the end of it. You need the light at the end of it. So we begin with that. We take the scary step. We land on that ice. We land in that black void of whatever. And we're faced with these noxious feelings. At this point, it's also really valuable for me to point out that this moment, this experience won't feel authentic. Because authenticity, what currently feels authentic to you, is what you know to do. It's the way you've learned to be. Our authenticity is a moving thing because we always have an edge to how much of ourselves we can express. There's always going to be new places in your life where you could be more fully expressed. And therefore, your current state of authenticity is a flexible thing. It's elastic. It will grow or shrink depending on how you're being in your life. So we want to be really cautious about this idea of well, it doesn't feel authentic to me. It won't. It never does at first. That's okay. We want to avoid getting attached to that idea of authenticity because that's another way our resistance will keep us from staying in this place. So once we step over that wall, the first thing that happens is our resistance will kick up and we will be unaware and it's going to be a bit meta, resistant to the idea that we're resistant. Mamal's person that she heard about that burnt out is going to argue, I'm not resistant to anything. I'm in it. I'm working really hard to stay the course that I set for myself. Unaware, on some level that'll be true. At this level of altitude or of perception, that will occur true. But the deeper thing that's being resisted is this feeling of, we'll say, disappointment. And either avoiding that situation or working super, super hard at a risk of burning yourself out are two ways to avoid this feeling. So the first step is really that we become resistant or even more so, and we recognize or we sort of do our best to understand we're going to be blind to it. It doesn't occur like resistance to us. Boy, I should have chosen a topic that had like slightly less sibilant sounding sounds in it. I'm really, this mic really picks up. My S is really good. Maybe I'll get some voice coaching on that. So that's step one. We've got resistance that's going to show up. And the first stage of our practice through this, as we're starting to learn how to overcome this and step through it, is to be blind to it. And frankly, to be in a state of resistance that there is even resistance. I'm not resistant. Thank you for your thoughts, coach. Thank you for what you have to share, leader. I'm not resistant. I'm doing my best. And that takes us some time to move through, and it takes a degree of altitude and um, like depth in the person supporting you to be able to see that. Most people at this point will see you've stepped over the wall, you're working really hard, and will just clap their hands and say, "Way to go! You can do it, girl," or "Guy, you go, guy." Is that a thing? Yes, queen. They'll shout at you, or whatever the yes, royalty, whatever the non-gendered version that we're saying these days is. So that's going to happen, and with a sufficient teacher, that teacher is going to point to you, that leader, that coach is going to be able to point to you and say, hey, consider that there's some resistance at play here. It still occurs, like you might be in an avoidance with something, and your job at this stage in the game is to be like, no, you're wrong, fuck off, thanks for your thoughts, but you're wrong. And we have to allow you to stay there as long as it takes for you to bankrupt that idea. Meaning you work really hard and you're like, no, 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 this isn't resistance. Until you get to a point where you kind of like, you can start to hear that reflection. And that will take as long as it takes. The longer we stay in this work, the easier it is to let that reflection in. But it's always going to be a moment of resistance. For me, for the best teachers I've ever worked with, the ones that are really truly deep recognize this. They eschew the idea that we can get to a point where we don't resist whatsoever. We just surrender time and time again. We get better and better and better, but there's always that moment where the stimulus shows up and we're like, we clench, we constrict. So that's step one, that happening and us being insistent that we're not resistant, we're blind to it. Step two is we start to recognize that it's there, but we stay in a state of justification. Yeah, I'm resisting this. Yeah, I'm running really hard, but this is why I'm doing it. Yeah, I might be leading myself to burnout, but I don't have any other options. And that occurs as complete truth because, again, at the layer of altitude or perception that we don't have any other options. Our life has been set up on this whole idea that disappointment is unacceptable. And so just being there is not an option. The only options are avoid this. We courageously took that off the plate. So now the only option is run like hell across this ice that we're on. Now we're at the point where we quit. So along our journey, we stepped over the first layer of resistance. New resistance showed up. We insist it's not the case. Then we overcome that. We start to, okay, yeah, maybe there's a degree of resistance, but you don't understand my work. You don't understand my situation. You don't understand the men or the women that I get into bed with, whatever it happens to be. You don't understand. I have to do this. And as time goes on, running on that ice stops working. We get more and more exhaustion. And we get to a point where we want to leave. We want to quit because we conclude this isn't working. The coaching's not working. You're great. Anytime someone wants to quit coaching, it always begins with, you're great. You're a great leader, but I want out. And this is the point where we try to flee. Because if we flee, we get to go back to avoidance. And it occurs like really, really smart on our parts. Really, really good call. This was really wise what we did. If you are working with someone who's really like potent and powerful and standing for you, they will not react to that. And they can just stand there and invite you back into the conversation and support you to see that that desire to quit is another version of resisting what's here to lean into. You chose into this. And the work here is to reacquaint ourselves with the reason we chose into this in the first place, to get back to that North Star. if we don't have that North Star at this moment, all we can see is, oh, I chose to do this because I wanted to overcome my resistance, but this is crazy and it's not making me feel better and it's not getting me anywhere. And why would I keep doing this? And then we quit. So this North Star is the most important at this point. And our work is to re-enroll ourselves in that with the support of our leader, our coach, whatever, so that we can stay the course. And if we do that, we get to a point of surrender. Surrender is where you stop avoiding the very thing this entire void is about. So for me, it's like, all right, I'm just going to sit here and be in my disappointment. I'm going to share a story about how this happened in my life, how this showed up. First, I'm going to look at my calendar, make sure I don't. Okay, great. I got oodles of time. I like having oodles of time. It's a good feeling. Yeah, I do. Excellent. So, back when I was younger and more handsome and fitter and my body wasn't falling to pieces, I was a squash player. I loved that sport. It's such a good sport. It's very like heady. It's incredibly athletic. You sweat like crazy. It burns so many calories. I could eat anything I wanted times three. Amazing. Super, super fun sport. I loved it. And I would play in tournaments. And guess what? In tournaments, people watch you. And what do you think that triggered in me? The fear of being a disappointment. And so one year when I first started, I was at a D level of play and I won the citywide tournament for D level players. And I moved up. And next year I was playing at the C level and I got myself into the finals of that tournament. Oh man, so cool. In one year, I climbed up through an entire rank. Amazing. And now I was no longer like this scrubby player, just doing stupid stuff. I was playing at a higher level. So there was like a little more stakes on the table for me. And I had friends that I'd trained with, and they were like, oh, dude, you're going to take this. It's so exciting. And as you can imagine, given what I've shared about myself, that drove up all of this fear about being a disappointment, being a letdown. And so I played from the position, like the way I was being as I was playing was, I don't want to lose this and disappoint my friends and be a failure and be a loser. And the match went terribly. The first two games, the guy I was playing with beat me handily. And then we were in the third game. You play the best of 5 games in a squash match, squash tournament. The best of 5 games, I was still caught in this, feeling awful, all in my head. And we got to this point where, I don't know, you play to 11, you win at 11, and it must have been something like 10-5 for my opponent. So I was down 2-0, 10-5. He had one more point and he would win. Maybe 9-5. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. And this was the moment where I had to face like, okay, I'm gonna I'm gonna lose this. Like that's gonna happen. And I just sat with it and like sort of like put myself in that space and let myself be disappointed in myself and allowed myself to be in the disappointment of like how everyone was feeling about me or how I imagined they were feeling. It didn't really matter, right? My projection was my reality. And like just imagining like at the tournament or at the party afterwards, like talking about it and yeah, here's how it went and blah, blah, blah. And in doing that, I could suddenly stop resisting it. And what happened was I played the next point from a place of like, I got nothing left to lose. There's nothing I've lost. So, okay. And what happened is I started to get out of my head and I started to get into my body. And I came back and I won that tournament miraculously. Now, that's a cool story because it's sort of like this moment where I faced the disappointment and then everything went perfectly well and I won a tournament and yay, what an inspiring story. That's not usually how it goes. And, shortly after I lost a whole bunch more tournaments out of a fear of disappointing people. So again, it's not a single event. This is just an example of that sort of moment that we have to face where we hit a point of surrender. I've been sort of like, yeah, I know I need to get out of my head. I need to get out of my head. I need to get out of my head in my head, telling myself that. But in that moment, I surrendered. And so this is the next step in our journey. We are in resistance to what's there. We can't see it. Then we can start to see it, but we still feel that we have to do it. And we are justified in that. And then eventually we hit a point of surrender and we just say, fuck it. It's not working. This isn't working. And instead of quitting, we stay the course. And at that point, we start being willing to try different things because what we've been doing hasn't been working. And often when we're trying other things, at first it comes from a point of like frustration or righteousness or like, fuck you, person standing for me saying this is possible. I'll show you how impossible it is. Look, I'm just going to do this random thing. We throw spaghetti at the wall. But that's an essential part of our journey because by throwing spaghetti at the wall, we're actually starting to break out of the linearity of avoid this or get into it and do whatever we have to do to make sure it doesn't happen now that we've put ourselves into it. And so from that point, what happens is we become much more free because we're no longer resisting the thing that this black void represented. And as we continue to practice with that, what happens is we start to discover, oh, that thing started to create a bit of a different result. Maybe I'll try that again. And as we continue that course, we start to calibrate a little bit. We start to be able to learn, okay, maybe I'll do that again, but not quite so big. Maybe I'm going to try, hey, you know what? That was way out there in the middle of the blue. Maybe I'll try this thing over here. And as this is happening, we're broadening our perspective. We're broadening the set of options that are available to us. And then what we have to keep doing through this process is we have to keep getting re-presence to that North Star, that vision that we're doing this for. The what for am I being, what for am I choosing into this awkward, noxious feeling that comes with being way outside of my comfort zone and feeling this awkward feeling? Oh, right, because I want X in my life, because I want to create this, because this matters to me. And as we continue to play there, what eventually starts to happen is a new pathway gets laid down in our neural system. And then we start to create a new way of being that was previously unavailable. And that is a breakthrough. That's how we move past our resistance. So the driver, to go back to your original question, Diana, is that thing that we really want and the support of someone who can keep reminding us of that, especially when we get to the point when we want to quit. So this is the process by which we overcome resistance. And what happens typically is we overcome it in this one place and we want to think, ah, oh, I did it. I will never face that resistance again. You'll probably face it almost immediately right after. You'll hit an incredible result and you'll want it to, to stick and to be there permanently. And it probably won't. You'll probably encounter it in a different place in your life, but it'll be very similar. And then we continue to move through it. So it's not a event we overcome and then like, whoop, off we are to the races. It tends to be more like circles winding upwards, momentum that gets generated. The next time we encounter this, we can see our resistance for what it is a little sooner. And we're a little less resistant to justifying it. We're a little less caught on that. And so we can release it faster. We can surrender faster. And then we can choose to remind ourselves of what we're going for, and we can run that course. And then the next time it happens, we get faster and faster until eventually what starts to happen in the areas of our life that we're currently playing in, this resistance stops showing up because we've created a new way of being. We've shifted our story of our own authenticity. And as you generate this momentum, you start to just become someone who, in this situation where disappointment may be on the line, it's no longer a thing you can't be with. It starts to become like, oh, I'm okay with this. Yeah, I don't, and it's not an intellectual exercise. It just becomes sort of like, yeah, I'm fine with this. You no longer have to run the strategies and patterns designed to protect you from that disappointment because you've learned that you can navigate it. And so then the cool thing is almost like at first it feels like you're practicing this everywhere and it's hard work. And then there's this moment kind of like where the curtain just falls down and suddenly this stops being a thing in your life for a period. Like all these places that previously had to go this way or that way linearly, suddenly there's a wide variety of options. And you discover like, whoa, I've got, it's been a long time since I had to run that strategy. So that's the process by which we overcome resistance. So I want to take a moment. I'm going to have a sip. I'd love to hear any questions or anything that this is bringing forward for you. I see Dave put something there. Anyone else watching, put something in the chat so that we can kind of play with this. And I'm going to read what the second question Diana had as well. Yeah, I really like the question you wrote there, Diana, which how to use resistance so as to learn from it / use it as a learning curve. So I will speak to that in a moment. Dave writes, I'm contrasting this hard with the idea of burning it all down and starting again versus building out from now. Dave, I'd really love for you to elaborate a bit on that. If you can give me like a few more examples, I can speak to it. I have a sense, but anything more any more flesh you can put on that, on the bones of what you've said there would be awesome. And Candida says avoidance is like an invitation. It can be. That can be how we learn to work with it. And so to Diana's question, like how do we use resistance so as to learn from it or use it as a learning curve? We can start to notice where resistance is showing up in our life. Like, what am I in resistance to? And the best place to spot this is not with the question, what am I in resistance to? Because remember, your resistance does not show up like resistance. You will not relate to it that way. That's not how you will hold it. Your resistance shows up like there's something wrong with this person and I don't like it. Or there's something I don't like about this situation. That's your resistance. So what we can do to learn to work with it, to build it, to grow is look at those situations and one begin like, okay, that's a place where I've got some resistance to how things are going on. What would I love to create in my life for which that story, that type of person, that type of situation blocks me? Is there something I actually want? And you want to be a little cautious with this because sometimes what people do is it's almost like they sort of make this journey like, if you think of your resistance like a wall, they start going into their life and they're like, oh my God, there's a wall over there. What is the thing I want to climb over onto that other side? Oh my God, there's a wall there. And that's fine. You can take that on, but it's also important to recognize like sometimes a wall is just a wall, or sometimes our resistance is totally fine and there's nothing we actually really care about on the other side of it, and that's just dandy. I'm resistant to going up to like, a homeless person injecting drugs into their body and being like, "Hey, how you doing?" And there's something I could probably create from leaning into that, but I don't that's not where I'm directing my life. So we can use our resistance to start to help us see the things we really want, but it more important than anything else, we really want to get clear on what we really want. That's the thing that is the driver behind all of this. Seeking out resistance, overcoming resistance for the sake of overcoming resistance is a fool's errand. It's tilting at windmills. It's not worth the effort. There has to be a bigger reason, a bigger thing you're going for. Let's see here. Dave says, when I don't like the situation enough, I start again, burn it down, leave, and go try again. Historically, it's cycles of projects rather than a continuum, rapid transition. Yeah, so that can be, the way I would work with that is one, like, oh, there's something I might be protecting myself, resisting. No big deal, not a problem. But what is the thing I would want in my life for which I would need to stay the course? What is something that I really, really crave? What is something that really matters to me that would be worth moving through that I don't want that tendency to stop me achieving? And what we want to do is we want to make this thing really big, juicy, and real. So typically what we do when we're exploring this is we're like, I would like to have a job that makes me happy. And that's as big as we make this. There's not a lot of meat on that skeleton. We got to make this fat, juicy, and wide. We got to put on the VR goggles and take this idea and make it fully immersive for ourselves. So we have to ask ourselves questions like, okay, what would life be like if I woke up in the morning and that was my job? And then we write. Journaling can be really powerful here. Okay, what would it be like if like this is all that I did? What would it be like if what would my day be like at the end of my day? What would it be like when I'm talking to my partner about how things have gone? How would my kids experience me differently? We want to really make this super rich. What instead of that, let's try that sentence again. Instead of that, what typically happens is we create a very terse, kind of like a summary of this goal that we want. And we're like, there we go. That's enough. I don't really want to spend too much time visioning. I want to get into action. And then we get over the wall and into our resistance proper. And our resistance has all the color and flavors and smells in the world. It is super high resolution. And it just blows out that summary version of your vision for yourself. And it completely destroys it. And then all you can see is why you want to quit. So we got to be willing to spend some time with that vision to make it juicy for ourselves. So we have something sufficient to pull us through the course when our coach or our leader, or, worst of all, but still better than nothing, we ourselves are trying to overcome our fear and remind ourselves why we're playing this game in the first place. That's what we have to do. That's how I would work with that, Dave. And so going back to what Candida wrote, this idea of our resistance being like a personal black belt training, if we face it, we will grow. That's what we're trying to do when we get into this void, is not be in reaction to it, recognize the reaction we're in, and then surrender to it. And again, that's a process with a number of steps, and it takes time, and it takes practice, and it takes grace. It takes a lot of grace for ourselves. Okay, so with our remaining time, I'd love to hear if anyone has any objections to any of what I'm sharing. Like, yeah, that's a great idea, Adam, but, or yeah, I can see why that might go this way, but have you considered, or here's how it is for me. Share that, especially if you're watching after the fact. I'll come back and respond to it. I really love those sort of comments. How do we work with this in other people? Well, in other people, the first step is recognizing everything that I've just laid out is there. And two, recognizing you probably won't want to see someone through this lens. The number one toxic term I hear tossed around in corporate executive leadership is uncoachable. And in all of this thing that we've described, when the person's resistant, the person, the leader or the coach or the whatever, the consultant is like, well, this person's uncoachable. No, they're not. They're just resistant. And you just don't have the capacity, the depth of being and access, and haven't done enough of your own work to be able to recognize that this is just natural resistance. This is an essential part of their transformation. And our job is to help them distinguish what's happening. And in order to distinguish what's happening, we have to be able to, in order for us to support someone to distinguish what's happening for them, we have to be able to distinguish it. And if what we're saying is slapping a label on and saying they're uncoachable, there's no distinguishing in that. That's just a convenient label that gets us off the hook of having to work with this person in a challenging moment. And so the way we work with this in people is we first distinguish all of this for ourselves, specifically with them. Oh, this person is like avoiding my emails and they're pushing me away and they're getting really snappy. Huh, that's probably the resistance. Okay, are we present to what they really want to create? Huh, is that there or not? Okay. Huh, what else could I look at? Well, what might this be helping them avoid? What don't they have to feel? Maybe I could ask that question of them. What do you think might be behind this? Like if you let go of that, if you really settled in, what do you think might be here for you that you're avoiding? And in order to ask these questions, we have to be able to relate with them. We have to be able to sit with them and not make them wrong for it. If you're holding energetically that someone's uncoachable, how willing do you think they're going to be to like open up to you? Right. So we have to let go of that ourselves. We have to see this through this lens that we've just laid out and recognize this is essential. The way they're showing up is perfect. From that place, I can ask some questions with some genuine curiosity. And if I am the clearing for that, then they can become the clearing for that themselves. They can step into that and get curious about it. And then we can start to work through it. So this is how we support other people moving through this process. This is the part I love about coaching, and it is so challenging, is we have to walk through this ourselves. We can't just know this intellectually. We have to have been supported by someone else to go through this ourselves. Because once we've been through this at least a couple of times, it becomes much easier to hold with grace on the other side. Because we stop being like, I would never show up this way. And instead we start to be like, damn, I know exactly what this is like. What they're doing is completely justified inside their system. They're not uncoachable. They're just they're actually being coached. They're being coachable right now. It's just challenging to be with. It's hard for me to be with. Okay, I've got one viewer question I want to take. Someone sent in a question beforehand. By the way, I always take questions. So if you're watching this or you're in between, you catch this afterwards on the replay, or just something shows up over the course of the month, send me a message, put it in our Ontological Leadership Network. Let me know, hey, I got a question that I'd love for you to cover. And I love that. It really serves me, our community, all of this. So first, the promise of mastering this art. The promise that's available is that we learn to love our resistance when we can see it. At first, we're always resistant to our resistance, which is crazy if you think about it, and super sophisticated and brilliant of resistance. Like, as a structure that is designed to keep you safe in the status quo, the fact that our own resistance has us in resistance to seeing it is brilliant because it means that we're unlikely to lean into it. We're more likely to just do what it's telling us to do. And so, what happens, the promise is over time, we start to soften. We start to get better at recognizing when we're in resistance, softening to it, letting go, and then looking up over there and being like, that's the thing I really want. And then getting clear on that and leaning into that. And so, work like this, transformational work where people stay in it long term, it's like circles moving up and up and up. Their momentum picks up as time goes on. We become better able to lean into this stuff. And the really beautiful thing is that the stuff that you most hated, feared, avoided, felt resistance to becomes the stuff you love the most. One of the things that I used to really find challenging was speaking in public and speaking extemporaneously, like this, just talking off the cuff. And it's become one of the things I love the most because that's a place where there was a part of me that wasn't yet able to be expressed. And so now this sort of thing is like new. It's like a new playground. It's like a new video game. There's a novelty to it, unlike all of the stuff that I was already well adapted to, unlike all the stuff that I've been doing for years comfortably. So your places of resistance, if you stay this course and master this art, become really, really exciting and become really, really fun places to play, and you start to revel in them, which is pretty cool. Okay, let's go to this question from our man Seth. Seth wrote this, love it, and I want to write about, or I want to speak to this. So this is a coaching question. Seth's in the forge with me, and he wrote, I supported a client this morning around wanting to quit. Their main pattern is that they cannot know what they want, so they perpetually try to figure it out. Just a little coaching tidbit there. Ontologically, there's something for us to notice there. I don't know what I want, so let me figure it out. Want comes from your heart. We're taking some liberty, right? But I'm saying like our desires are not a figured thing out. You don't sit at a Ouija board or like roll dice or put stuff in a spreadsheet and then conclude what you want. So there's this person trying to they don't know what they want, and so they're trying to figure it out, and that'll never work. But never mind that. So that's the pattern. This led to being able to not define projects besides quote unquote working on themselves. And after exploring it for 45 minutes, they were on the fence because they could see that quitting might be the same thing, but they didn't feel like they had anything to stand on to move forward because they don't know what they want. I'm wondering if anyone has any tips for how to support people who don't know what they want. So, super common and a very good way to not have to lean in, like super sophisticated mechanism to avoid you leaning into what's scary. Because if you don't know what you want, this will never become clear. If you never bring this vision clear, then you'll never have a reason to lean outside of your comfort zone other than this vague sort of feeling that you're not quite living the life you'd like. In the absence of like being able to feel our desires, what we instead feel is sort of like a low grade perpetual dissatisfaction or maybe complaint, or sometimes like very low grade resentment of other people or the situations we find ourselves in life. So if that's an experience you can relate with, and certainly one I can relate with, it's probably because you've learned to shut down your desire. So I'm going to talk briefly how that happens, why that happens, and then what we do with it. So what typically happens for a lot of us growing up is we learn that what we want comes second to what needs to happen. And that training comes very easily. Like sometimes it comes from, oh, well, you can have that after you do your chores. Okay, got it. So my wants are second to what needs to be done. I'll do what needs to be done, then I get what I want. And then as we go into the world, that becomes more and more prominent. It becomes the game of life. Instead of being told, like, what do you want to do with your life? We're told, well, what are you going to do that's going to set you up? And that is ultimately a variety of the question or the statement. Figure out what you need to do so that you can have what you want. And so we get better and better and better in life at playing the game of going after what we want, or sort of what we need, and setting aside what we want while we're doing that. The more you are present to your desire, And the difference between that and what you need to do, the worse off you are, because that will create resentment, frustration, heartbreak, letdown, all of that stuff. And so, what makes more sense down this pattern that we're describing is slowly soften, deaden, stop listening to the voice of your desires. And then, if you can get it down, it becomes much easier to keep going after what you need to do, because then there's nothing else to focus on. So a lot of people, myself, this was absolutely how I was showing up. This is what made me an effective lawyer. Never mind my morals, never mind what I felt about this case, never mind my sense of right and wrong and justice and all of that. What do I need to do? How do I need to be to defend this client, regardless of the heinous thing that they've done, or regardless of how wrong I think it is? I could set aside all those scruples and just be here with this person from a place of needs. And consider that that's a beautiful system. It has consequences that we probably wouldn't choose to have in the world, but I got there honestly. I got there because I was trying to be a man who did what was required of him and just selflessly set aside what I wanted so I could do that. This is why a lot of bad things happen in the world, is because people have learned to do this. It's not malice, it's a learned behavior, a pattern that then gets spun up into like all the momentum in the world. So that's how we create that. And what'll happen is these are the sort of people for which there won't be much to coach around, because their whole thing is like what they need to do, and that will be inside their realm of safety. So to work with this, what I like to do with people is begin as a starting point, having them get clear on like, what are your desires? Like, start listening to the voice of your, let's take one step back. The starting premise is that to be a human is to want. End of. And if you have an objection to that, I would love to hear it, because I assert every single human being comes out of the womb clear on what they want. I want food. I want to poo. I want you to hug me. I want you to look at me. We are not born sitting there as a baby like, I wonder what I need to do. That is a secondary thing. So this is a learned behavior. And if it's a learned behavior, then we can undo it. Then we can unlearn it. We can create something different. This isn't to say there's not a time where we have to put our needs in front of our wants. That's part of being an adult, part of being a parent. But it is to say that most of this becomes radically unbalanced. And it becomes automatic, meaning we have no capacity to calibrate. Is this a time when my wants might be better served, rather than just figuring out for the 9th year in a row what I need to do? Boy, I'd love a vacation, but maybe next year, right? That's problematic. That leads to burnout. So as a starting point, I like to have people begin to get clear, like, what do I want? Start to notice your desires in a small way. Can you hear the voice of your desire minimally? Like, I want ice cream now. I want to eat a chocolate bar now. I want to call in sick to work now so I can play video games now. And because these are small, because that's the only degree to which we can hear our desire, we're quick to dismiss them. The practice is learning to hear the voice of your desire a little bit, like 1% more than you currently allow yourself, and then building on that. It's like lifting a muscle at a gym. The second thing I like to have people do is listen to the voice of their resentment, complaints, and frustration, and get clear on what the desire is underneath that. So typically, it'll be like, oh, excuse me, this person over here takes up all the space in the room. And the layer one of this would be like, well, what's my desire? For them to shut the hell up. I'd like to get them a nice warm glass of shut the hell up. No. Well, I mean, that's fine, but then why? Like, what would that provide you? And we want to get clear, like, what is it that I desire outside of this person that this moment is driving up? So it might be like, I want to speak into the space. I want to take up some space. I would like some peace and quiet. I would like some time to think. Now we're getting into your desire. So our desire, the complaint tends to project our desire at other people and then make them wrong for what we're not getting. We want to let them off the hook, but use that and transmute it so we can get clear, what is it that I desire? And as we do that, we become better and better and better at beginning to hear the voice of our desire. And that allows us to start taking baby steps towards it. When you go down this path, what will happen with your clients is that they'll start to have an experience of more heartbreak. They'll start to have an experience of probably more frustration at first, more heartbreak, more letdown, more annoyance, because now they're raising the volume of their desire, and the gap between your desire and what you have is on some level heartbreak. It is a missing in your life, so to speak. So we want to be really clear with people. This is part of the process. And we want to celebrate them when they're starting to feel that because they're opening their heart and feeling more. That's the journey. Until we can be with that, we can't we can't allow that gap. And until we can allow that gap, we're not going to have anything that drives us towards creating what we want. So that's generally the way that I start to work with this with people. The other way that you can do this is you can get clear on like, what's the cost of living your life this way? So rather than look at desire, let's say that life doesn't change and it's just the way it always is, and you just don't know what you want and you go through life. How's that going to go for you? What are you going to get from that? What's that going to be like? What's the consequence of that? And what that does is it kind of helps them get more present to the complaint side of things. And then we can turn that into begin to build out a vision for what they want. So that's how we work with that. It's a really, it's a really effective strategy for staying safe and playing a game that often looks good to a lot of people, but internally does not feel that good. And it's super effective. It's very resistant to coaching in the sense that it's very good at keeping us where we are. It justifies itself very, very beautifully. Okay. I think we covered everything. Thank you, Seth, for that question. Really, really great question. Big thanks to Dave, Candida, Diana, and Mamal. Anyone else? And Harmony for what you provided, for your input, your questions today, and your and sharing your thoughts. I'm not sure yet what our next month's topic will be. If you have a suggestion, please put it in the comments. Let me know so that we can, we can do that. I want to invite anyone watching this to like share some thoughts on this. If you're someone who has like who likes writing, or aspires to like publish more, or just wants to like practice putting yourself out there, we'll announce the topic. Put out a piece of writing into the group. I'd really love to see that. And second is in May, we are running our next intensive. So that'll be the last, I think it's currently scheduled for the last weekend of May, somewhere thereabouts. And so let us know if that's something you're interested in, if you like this conversation and you'd like to like broaden it, maybe expand a little bit, have a bit more of a dose of it in your life, or be able to deliver this kind of work more to the people you support, come to that intensive. It's going to be awesome. Look forward to seeing people there. That is everything for today. So have an amazing weekend. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will catch you next month. Oh, one last thing I forgot to share is that we have our upcoming public forge call. I think that's how do I bring this up? I know I've got a shortcut where I can change this. There it is. So I'm just going to put this in the chat here. These are sort of a way you can experience this work maybe a little more directly, where we're actually supporting someone. So on our public forge calls, they're free. You have to register, but if you register and you can't make it, you can just, you'll get the recording. And what we do on these calls, usually myself or Bay or one of the people that lead in our work, do a teaching for the first part. And then the second part is usually some live coaching. So this coming Monday, the 25th, is when our next call will be. We've got the amazing Darren Bridge that will be teaching on creating really powerful agreements with people, coaching or otherwise, and then I'll be doing some live coaching. So come join us there if you'd like to, if you're interested in that. Hope to see you there. Have an amazing weekend, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.